Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So welcome to Councilor Corner Live. The topic for tonight's Councilor Corner Live is the land bond. And I'm thrilled to see so many people in the room. I came out about 5 minutes ago and it was just me and one other gentleman. And I thought, oh boy, this is not going to be as successful as I hoped. So I'm thrilled to see so many people here. If you have not attended a Councilor Corner Live, the format is very informal, especially when I'm in the driver's seat. I don't have an agenda. I don't have my talking points. There's no slideshow or presentation. We're here to have a discussion. I will give you, I can only speak for myself. I will give you my candid and honest opinions. That's part of the reason why I think this engagement is unique is because we can have a two-way dialogue and I will be honest as I can be with what I think. Councilor Karen Shoup is here and Councilor John Anderson is also here. He's graciously volunteered to be our mic guy. If you don't want to leave your seat and you'd like to just speak into the microphone, just raise your hand and John will bring you the microphone. We can also use the microphone at the dais if you want to come to the dais with your comments and questions. I don't have a whole lot of other things to say to tee this up other than welcome. And if there's somebody who would like to go ahead and get us started, I'm happy to acknowledge the first speaker.
Can you tee it up and explain?
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. Do you want to, Karen? We'll turn that over to Karen.
Yeah, so I think as some of you may know that we are proposing right now, and it's gone through the first read of town council, is a $6 million land bond. So we do have a history of doing land bonds over the last 15, 20 years. This is not the first one. This will be the fifth one that we've done. We have increased the ask amount, but I think if you've been paying attention, one of our goals this year that we established at the beginning of the year was a 30 by 30 goal, is to conserve 30% of Scarborough by 2030. Which is not only a state goal, but it's also a national goal. So we thought, considering where we live and what our natural resources is, this seems like a natural thing for us to do. Very happy that the council has supported it. So, and also, we get a lot of feedback about the rapid rate of growth in Scarborough. So I think one of the discussions and the support that you'll see from council behind the land bond is this is somewhat of an alternative and a different choice in response to development, is conserving the land. And so, we are discussing right now putting the land bond on there, and the discussion we had at our goal meeting tonight was, this is a recommendation from the town council. We do recommend the 6 million. It is a big ask, and we know there's been some questions about that, but we do feel like leaders in that. And was that everything? The land bond?
The only thing I would add to that is just in terms of where we are in the process. The council has heard first reading. And we did vote to put it to a second reading. And so we had kind of this intermediate step in between where we saw an opportunity to engage the public to better inform our decision-making at second reading. So this is not something that has already been decided. I think that the council is eager to hear public feedback as we go into second reading because we recognize that this is a big request.
Public hearing is at our August 21st meeting in 2 weeks. And then the second reading would be September 4th. So there's still more opportunity for feedback as well. Anybody want the mic?
I don't really.
Well, this way people might be listening online, so we want to make sure that they can hear you, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's more for the recording and the people in the
So I was just going to ask a question, follow-up question about that. So for the readings, is that something that's online that people can know when those timelines are so that they can provide the feedback? Or is that if they can't come to the public hearing? But just trying to at that sense that they were. I guess I'm wondering, are the second and third reading public?
Yep, that's a great question. So all of our meetings are public and open to the public. We have public notice requirements that require us to have our agenda posted online. And so people are able to see the broad calendar of our upcoming meetings and then attached to those meetings. When it gets within 7 days of the meeting, we'll also have the agenda attached. And so you can see very clearly if something is coming up for discussion. And there's multiple ways to engage with the council. Email is great. And so our general email is towncouncil@scarboroughmaine.org. And we all receive that. All 7 of us will receive that email. You can email individual counselors, and all of our individual council emails are also available on the website. And so we take those emails into consideration when we're making our decisions. They won't necessarily be read aloud or put into the public record unless that is a specific request. And then there's also the opportunity to make public comment during those meetings at designated times.
Yeah, just a finer point to that, since this is in process, August 21st will be public hearing. And then it's scheduled for second reading on September 4th.
And for those that don't know, this is our town manager.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
No
Yep.
worries. Other questions, comments? And if you want to state your name, that would be great. We're a little less formal. I'm not going to require you to tell us where you live.
Well,
But we're all friends here.
my name is Richard Hayes and I live on Martin Avenue in town. That's the good news. Bad news is I oppose this strongly. There are a lot of needs in the town that I believe need to be prioritized way above the acquisition of the land bond. I've also learned that Scarborough is rather unique in funding through town monies. Apparently, most of the land bonds in the land trusts in the state are funded, self-funded through donations and requests from people that have direct interest in it. I think that should be pursued more heavily, and I do not believe that this should go to the voters. If it does, I'm definitely a no vote. As I say, there are too many other critical needs in town. I am supportive. I know that's not a topic tonight. I am supportive of the fire engine and the police bond. But as I say, this is not necessary in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I apologize for rummaging through my stuff. If anyone sees a notebook with some darling children on the front, I've misplaced my notebook and it's pretty identifiable because it has all my kids' pictures on the front. It's somewhere in town hall right now. But the reason I was looking for it is because I had made some notes in terms to speak to your point about what neighboring communities do in terms of whether or not they request taxpayer funding or whether or not they rely more heavily on private donors. I think for me personally, it's all in how you frame it. It's one thing to say that we're an outlier in terms of other communities don't do this. And the other way of framing that is we are paving the way, right? We're trailblazers because other communities don't do this, but Scarborough does. And so I don't want to mince words with anyone or diminish anyone's opinion, whether they stand on this side or that side of, kind of these vocabulary choices. But I will say for me personally, like, I think it's a good thing that Scarborough uses the model that we do. And so your point is well taken that other communities do not use the same model, and I acknowledge that. But for me, I think that that's a positive.
I just want to elaborate a little because you are right. We are unique. Part of the reason I live in Scarborough is its uniqueness. And I constantly say to people from out of state, we have the largest saltwater marsh in the state. I take pride in that and I brag about it. So I do feel like we have a responsibility. And so I do feel like we are leaders in this. And it's not, I do realize that, 6 million is a lot, but I think if you saw the article that I did on the land bond, and I think John touched on it as well, is these are more like matching funds. With these funds, we've been able to bring in so much more money to the town to be able to conserve land. And I think that's one of the things that we want to highlight. And I do take pride in us being leaders because we've worked with partners and been able to get these grants and private donors and things like that. At the beginning, April said this is a very casual sort of council corner live thing. I'm very passionate about the land bond. I wanted to do slides tonight. I wanted to
I
have
said no.
facts up here. April's like, no, Karen. One of the things I don't have facts for, but you will consistently hear me say, and I think some of the data behind some of the particular projects and reports that have come out is that the reality is that to conserve land costs taxpayers less than to develop it. So in our mind, for me personally as a counselor, and some of the information I gave when I said, let's adopt this 30 by 30 goal, let's do, this is, when you break it down, to conserve land ultimately your taxes will not be impacted, where development, no matter how much you would real estate tax wise, it has such an impact on your town that I do feel like it is more impactful.
John?
So I would just add, I appreciate your perspective too, Richard. And again, I think, anytime you go and vote, it's always a reflection of what you as an individual value. And I don't think it's right or wrong to vote yes or no for the land bond. But what I would say is, I think it's our responsibility, given the history of our community where they've have said yes 5 times repeatedly, that this is something that they value, to go back and ask again and say, hey, we're back for the 6th time. Is this still something that is important to our community? And do we want to continue to support something like this? And whether it passes or fails, I think that's important that we know, so that we can figure out, okay, if this no longer is the right solution for how we want to pursue land acquisition, or if now's not the right time, or whatever the reason may be, then that's information we need, and we need the public to ultimately make that decision, because by charter, it's not our responsibility for investments of this size to make that decision on your behalf. It's our responsibility to bring that information to the voters and let the voters ultimately decide, or at least that's my philosophy of when it comes to these types of things is, it's not the 7 of us making the decision on behalf of the community. It's us asking the community to make the decision on behalf of the community.
Other comments? Yeah, Debbie. Hi. Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Gates. I would like to know, and I think the public deserves the transparency of understanding the origin of the $6 million figure. I watched it be batted around and explained away, and I am still utterly confused. I don't think it's been clear. I don't think it's been transparent. So I'd like to be told the real deal.
Sure. Karen, do you want to speak to that
Sure.
as liaison to the
Yes,
committee?
so that recommendation came out of the Parks and Conservation Land Board, which I'm the liaison to. And so I think they had sent to town council, I believe, correspondence back in January recommending that we tee this up for another land bond request come November. And the correspondence that we specifically received from them said between 5 and 10 million. So that committee went back and they further deliberated on what they thought an appropriate amount would be. And I think they also consulted with the Conservation Commission as well. And so I think, there's a lot of, I think 6 is nowhere close to what they wanted to ask. I think it's what they felt would be more palatable or more reasoning. Right. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about the survey. The survey, I think that was something that was done outside of the town's privy, as in we were actually not part of the survey in regards to we didn't fund it. It was a grant given that it was conducted by a different entity. So correct. So we knew that a grant was being given to just explore what amount a land bond should be and further explore what the priorities are for the residents within the town. So it's not just, how much money do you think we should spend, but what are your priorities within the resources? There's many different priorities here. And so that was a survey that was conducted that we got a very loose presentation on. We got none of the data from, and I will say as a new counselor, it was unbeknownst to me that none of this data was going to be available to us. So what happened was when we immediately found out how long the survey was, I also participated in the survey, which took me 16 minutes. I'm not going to lie. I was a little concerned about it as well. I think a decision was made that if we can't have the results of the survey, it's very hard for us to take a recommendation from it. So that was, my understanding was that was just the recommendation that came from them, but that's the recommendation from the Parks and Conservation Land Board.
Based on the survey results.
I'm not sure if their recommendation was based on that. I think they, and so I think, and I think that's where we just said we're not going to consider the survey because we weren't given access to it. None of the counselors are aware of all of the questions that were going to be asked. We really don't know what any of the data came back. That was just the recommendation, the one little tidbit that came out of the survey. I mean, it was very discouraging, unfortunately, and I don't want it to cloud over that fact. And I think that's where we break down the 6 million ask. And when we talk about how much land we have left to conserve in Scarborough and all of the matching that we have, 6 is actually a pretty sweet number, because if we continue that model of that, we do 1/3 and then we get grants for 1/3 and then private donorships for 1/3, that actually gets us up to a higher number towards our goal. And so I think we need to more focus on what the cost of land is, what our goal is, and how we can get there.
I think for me, you know, when the amount first came forward, and even still, like I kind of feel like it's a little high. But at the same time, when you look at what we need to accomplish based on the preliminary results from the open space plan, and there's still 1,700 acres, at least in their preliminary assessment, that we need to acquire. I think the numbers equated to roughly $28 million that it would cost to acquire that at the same rate we've been doing. And then I think on top of it, the fact that in our recent revaluation, the cost of land has gone up 2.4%. So if you take the 2.5 million that was the last ask and kind of normalize that for the cost of land today, that is getting us pretty close to 6 million. So again, I feel like it's a number that, you know, is what's before us, at least as at our first read. If there's a different number that this group thinks would make more sense, I mean, that's why we're here. Is there a different recommendation? As Karen's mentioned, I've heard people willing to support 10 million. I've heard some people preferring to support 2 million. Again, some of this is ultimately a value decision that the person in the booth or in the poll is going to have to decide, is 6 million the right number for them, or is it something else? And again, if it's not 6 million, if that's what we're putting out there and there's something better, you know, let us know. Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it 6 million just right? I think that would be really helpful to hear from the group.
So one thing,
Or zero,
Some-
yeah,
and some
zero
said
might
zero.
be, zero is also a reasonable answer. So can we do a little poll?
oh, hold on, I just want to add my one piece to this, and then I would love to do a poll. So for me, I agree. My initial reaction to the number was that felt high. And more because I am really passionate that a land bond be passed. And so my focus is on putting something out that I think will pass, and whatever that sweet magic number is. And so for some residents, it's really important to justify and have some concrete data to back up the request. Whereas other residents are going to measure that number with their heart, and and this is going to be a values question for some. But ultimately, from where I sit, from a council perspective, my ease with the $6 million at this point is because A, we're not going to bond it all at once. And B, is if we find ourselves in a position where land prices are skyrocketing, where conservation is just not going to be something that we can continue to prioritize because we've taken on additional debt in the form of a school, for example, there's always a mechanism at the council level to reject those requests. And so what essentially we're asking for is a line of credit that we may or may not use depending on the 7 people who are sitting up there when the request comes in. And so for me personally, I'm okay extending that request, that line of credit ask, knowing that there's also a mechanism up here for people to say, no, this is not the right time to be spending that money. And so that's my only piece that I wanted to add.
Yeah.
If it passes, I think you'd be hard pressed to convince anybody that the council would say no to it when they come to you for the land purchase. That's not the real world. And the biggest objection, everybody
Richard, can you come to?
Oh, sorry, I'm not doing a good job with my mic.
I just want to make sure that we're
everybody just
for the mic.
wants to walk away from prioritizing town needs. I mean, there's still a huge need for school. And that's still in the development stage. There's a proposal that is gonna come before the council for a community center that has a price tag of over $82 million. And I know that's talked about that it's not gonna be bonded or requested anytime soon. But these are priorities, and to me, the town has got to operate just as I do individually. You know, there are a lot of things that I'd like to have, but guess what? I can't afford everything. So you make choices. In the town, I just don't see the town making enough hard choices. We want everything. My son, when he was younger, much younger. You know, and it's typical, kids want everything, you know, why can't I have it? You know, my grandson said to me one day, Grandpa, just go to the bank. You know, you whip out that card, you know. And that's the way I see the town operating. We're just whipping out the card and creating the debt. That's the way the country is. I mean, everybody just whip out the card. In my mind, we just need to prioritize. And the land bond is on the bottom of my priority list.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm gonna have John lead us.
I just want to do a hand raise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have John lead us for a second and then we'll go on to more comments.
Yeah, I'm just
Just a
curious.
second, just a
Yeah.
second.
You, yeah.
Don't
The two counselors who offered that they thought this was too high, can you please volunteer what your sweet spots are? You sit in the catbird seat of understanding what the town can and cannot do. So before you ask us, can you volunteer what you think it should be?
My sweet spot is what I think will pass, and I think 6 million will pass.
My sweet spot initially was trying to like take the original 2.5 million and trying to normalize that for the increase in the recent land revaluation. And so if it really is 2.4 times, then again, it's close enough to 6 million. 2.5 times 2.4, I don't think that's quite 6, but it's close enough. Again, my concern is more similar to some of the feedback I've heard from Richard, where, you know, more and more people, I think, legitimately are struggling to pay their bills and stuff with all the macroeconomic things that are happening. And I think, you know, especially the seniors in our community on fixed income who want to support this, who would normally support this, who maybe supported it the last 5 times, when they're in that poll box might really struggle voting yes this time. And again, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. I think everybody has to ultimately decide themselves whether this is the right thing for them. But again, that's my worry, is that we're at a point really outside of the control of the council where there's bigger macroeconomic things happening right now that are gonna cause people to really maybe question their values and whether it's something they can afford. I think that was the same thing that happened with the school. I think there were a lot of people who, when the school came forward, looked at the number and said, you know, you might have had people in there who was like, yeah, there's a problem. I want to support this, but I can't support 130 million. And so again, that's a totally legitimate reason for that person to vote no. So I think that's where it's tough. And again, it's really up that, you know, I don't think it's the town. This is more of a philosophical position. I don't think it's the town's position to make that choice on behalf of voters. I think it's ultimately up to the voters to make that choice and collectively as a community decide, is this something we want to do or not? And again, if 6 million is yes, that's great. If 6 million is mostly no, that's okay. There's something that was missed and we have to figure that out. But we won't know that unless we ask. This is part of that. This gives us some insight. But again, this is, you know, we have 20,000 voters that will be voting, hopefully come this November, and we need to hear from everybody. So can I do my poll? All right, so I'm just curious. I'm just gonna, yeah. Well, you can keep the dialogue going. This is just, I'm just curious to see from the people in the group, like, we've heard a lot from people who don't support it. We haven't heard from people who support it. I'm just curious to see where are we with the people in this room? And what would they support?
So if everybody in the room thought no, would that influence the council's opinion? I'm referring back to the very first Council Corner Live, where there were 60 some odd people who showed up live and online. And I believe it was about growth. And there was a large conversation about people who were concerned about growth. And it didn't amount to a hill of beans because we just kept expanding.
We can have a
management.
We can have a conversation about that. I'm disappointed to hear that your perspective is that it didn't amount to a hill of beans because we spent the next 18 months refining the rate of growth ordinance and did make quite a lot of changes. And it was a council priority at, many, many meetings. And so I don't think that the council, I disregarded the feedback, but that's my perspective. And so to answer your question, if every single person in this room is a no, that's hard to ignore, right? And so I think that, in the interest of transparency, everyone should know that we've received probably 35 or 40 emails in support. And so, this is just another point of information gathering.
Well, I think it's helpful because the data I didn't have tonight was breaking down that if you take an acre of land and conserve it, it would ultimately impact your taxes less than this $6 million bond ask. And that's where I do feel like this is a direct response to the growth concerns. There are many different things we can do. We updated the growth ordinance, and then also we can say, maybe we should put more money towards conserving land instead of allowing it to be continuously developed. So when a lot comes available, like we just bought 130 acres off in the rural farmland, we can prevent a lot of growth by putting funds towards that conservation.
So can I do my poll before we go to you, Suzanne? I'm just curious. So again, this is just to understand like where people sit in this room and like how they feel about what we're doing. So I'm just gonna ask everybody to raise their hand to start. Can everyone raise their hand? All right. And well, let me think about this. So keep your hand up if you would support $1 million on the land bond. Keep your hand up if you would do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 plus. Okay, that's where I'm gonna stop it. So again, I think it's a pretty mixed, what I saw was a pretty mixed group of people who feel, differently about this on the spectrum.
They are directly land bond people. This gentleman runs the land bond, he held his hand up for 50 million.
He's the Scarborough resident.
I understand.
Scarborough resident, I did the same vote.
Yeah, I understand that, but I just
I'm
pointing out that.
I'm not a landlord person. I'm a young Scarborough resident and I really care about the future of the town. I'm one that's likely to be here, hopefully, 40, 50 years from now. And I think the choices that we make now are critical. I'm getting emotional because this is my first town meeting. I've never been here before,
Welcome.
but I'm really passionate about this. I moved to Scarborough from South Portland. I care so much about conservation. It is one of the reasons why I moved here. I want to thank all the councilors for the time that you are spending talking to residents and doing these meetings. I'm just blown away by your ability to be able to meet everyone halfway and communicate with everyone. I think if we don't pay the $6 million right now, I'm also a homeowner here, we're all going to end up paying that in taxes because of development. So it is an investment, and if we don't pay it this year, it's going to be 5 years down the line. I think it is a critical point in Scarborough because the land that we have today, we're not going to have it again next year or the year after that. So we don't have a right to complain about hotels going up and McDonald's and traffic and all of that if we don't do something about it. And I think the only thing being asked for here is to let the residents decide. I think it's important to remember we're not voting or the council here is not voting on 6 million. It's letting the Scarborough residents decide. And as it was said before, maybe the residents will say, you know what, 6 million, it's not the way to go. And we'll have to go back to the drawing board. And maybe people's conservation views have changed, but we will know until we send that to the polls. But I just want to say I'm not, again, part of the land bond. I am a Scarborough resident and I felt compelled to be here today because I do really care. Thank you.
Thank you. Other people with comments? Suzanne's had her hand up. And then we'll kind of make our way around. Thanks, guys.
Hi, okay, so, one of the things that was brought up was priorities, and I honestly think that one of the priorities that I think everybody can agree with is the health of a community. And water quality is a huge help. We talked about the salt marsh. It's the largest salt marsh in the whole East Coast. And 80 to 90% of commercial fish species rely sometimes, some part of their life cycle relies on the salt marsh. And we do have a responsibility, but it's not just for our own health, it's also for protecting businesses, fisheries businesses, and the fishery industry in Maine is huge as well. So is our clam. So protecting the water is not just about the drinking water over in West Scarborough, it's also about the businesses that earn money from the town or from the state also. The other thing is that the value of every single person's property in the town of Scarborough goes up when we protect conservation land. And if you want the studies, just email me and we will give you all of the bibliography that shows that the value of your property has gone up because or remained higher than those communities who do not protect land next to their residential areas. And then I think the last thing is that, so when we talk about priorities, managing growth was one of the very first things that almost 100% of the community wants managed growth. This is one small piece of it. And what I think people are forgetting is that every acre that we protect in this community is going to save your tax dollars. Economics is really important here. In 20 years, these bonds are paid off, and guess what? There's no cost to us. We allow for development, and there's an ongoing cost year after year after year after year after year. And I think that's something that people have to understand, that we're not over 20 years, we're not going to pay anything for this land. Right now, it's the land trust, God bless them, who spends the money for the stewardship. Our community is benefiting from their putting their private money into it. And we are leveraging millions and millions of dollars, 11 million, 20 million to our 5 or 6 million. It's really incredible. And while I understand, you guys can go back and look at my record. I had the lowest tax rate when I was the town councilor there ever was. This is a method by which you can prevent your taxes from raising too fast. It is a part of managed growth. And I just think you need to, when you talk about priorities, if you're saying a school is a priority, $6 million is peanuts compared to 130 million. What is that? What percentage of 130 million? So I'm not going to pit the school against, but I'm saying it's a pittance. It's small.
Thank you. Next person. Thank you. Hi. You have to hold the microphone. Yeah, like you're on. Yep, there you go.
Created large 6%. It's ecosystem because of the storm. Save the money, has it on its website. It says it's thing. In the state, we need to conserve more. protect people.
Thank you. Other folks who would like the microphone.
Hi, my name's Marvin Gates.
Hey, Marvin.
I live on Black Point Road, Scarborough resident. I certainly don't agree with the don't disagree with the gentleman who just spoke. Like him, I think I led a, conservation 501c3 nonprofit in Scarborough for 6 years, recently retired from my post there. Certainly am sensitive, understanding, I think, knowledgeable, some might question, but about the issues at hand. I couldn't participate in your hands up survey, John, because the difficulty I have here is with the premise of what's going on. I'm in favor. I appreciate this gentleman's passion behind me. I can't say I have that youthful passion anymore, but I certainly appreciate it. And I think I understand it and feel it and share it. But I have two things to say. That's my intro I just gave. At your finance committee's meeting, this is a little check mark, a box I need to check, on June 13th. A person who's in the room, who I have a lot of respect for and is on the board of the Scarborough Land Trust, made a cogent point and said, the land bond money does not come to the land trust. These are quotes. It goes to properties that are used by the people around Scarborough and the greater area. Not a penny of that comes to the land trust. And I think technically, of course, that's accurate. However, the money that we're talking about, having the town take to bond and pay for land, is going to land that is owned by the land trust. And that's the beginning of my difficulty here. I don't know why the town is in the business, I'm sure somebody can help me, of helping a 501c3 nonprofit purchase land. I understand all the whatever, the covenants that may be applied, et cetera, that those make it relevant. Here's the thing, that's my first point. I'm a donor to the Scarborough Land Trust. I'm a modest donor. I'm sure they have great donors. And I think all of us should take our hats off to them. I receive a tax incentive to donate my little bit. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm incentivized to make that donation because the federal government gives me a little break. I can deduct it. There's no such anything like that occurring here. And I view this quite bluntly as it's not conscription, it's taxation. Without a kind, I mean, I'm certainly not going to give to the land trust anymore if I am forced to give to the land trust via tax on principle. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'd love to hear somebody tell me I'm wrong. But I just don't buy the entire premise of this. And I'm sorry that I have to, say that. And please, I'll stop.
Hi, I'm Sue Hamill. I don't think anyone is here tonight who doesn't support the land trust. And we love what they do. And so I think that the problem I have is with the way we fund
the land trust is that it is an uncommon model that Scarborough has used. And I asked myself, well, how did this even happen? Well, I think probably way back in the, 19, when the land trust first started, at some point early on, a piece of land came available and they didn't have the money. And so they came to the town and said, would we, can you help us out? And the town did. And so that kind of set a precedent. And from that point on, well, now we need more money. And so let's do another bond and let's do another bond. But the fact is that if you look around the state of Maine, there's something like 80 small land trusts, similar to the Scarborough Land Trust. And many of them, I mean, some are very big and some are small. But some are thriving and they exist solely based on their private donor fund. That's where they get their money. And yes, they apply for grants just like the Scarborough Land Trust does. And they're part of the community. And I looked at a lot of land trusts around the state. And yeah, there are some that are kind of sleepy and some that are really robust and dynamic and are totally integrated into the communities. They have community gardens, they have programs, they're flourishing. And so that model works. We know that donor-funded land trusts do extremely well. You've got to have a robust, development department or a couple of people, full-time people, and a program. You need to have a capital campaign and an ongoing campaign. And so I want to say that I know how I assume that that's how we got our model here in Scarborough. We've always done it this way, so let's just keep doing it this way. Well, people don't necessarily know. If you haven't looked around, this isn't the only way. And if you look at how the land bonds have been passed over the years, is the first one passed with 75%. And since then, it's just been, the last one passed by 58%. So it's been a steady decline in public support of those bond issues. I feel that the $6 million bond it's too big. I really, I don't think it'll pass. But I also look at the land trust, and there was an article in this week's newspaper about Portland trails and how so many of their trails had been washed out, and they're really struggling to get to raise the money to maintain everything they need to maintain. And that's where I'd like to see the town of Scarborough give some support to the land trust in terms of their operating expenses. A little bit like we do, we completely fund the library, but I don't want to get off topic. They do deserve our support, but private donors, that's where the money should be coming from, with potentially some money, annually to help the trails, the maintenance, and all of their ongoing supports. There's a couple other things I'd like to say, and one is the 30 by 30 goal. So when that 30 by 30 goal was announced and, Biden came out with it, and so many of the states have adopted it. So is this a state by state goal? Because if it is, the state of Maine has actually already met the goal. And when you think about it, there are some towns and some areas that you couldn't expect that they would be. For instance, the city of Portland.
Sure.
And when you think about smart growth, you do want to have growth in certain areas and not have growth in other areas. And so when we buy up all our land, put it in land trusts and it can't be developed, are we pushing growth farther out into the countryside, say? And I'm just raising that question. I know that we have a study that's going on right now that says we still need to buy 1,700 acres to meet our 30%. but, maybe that's not really the right number for Scarborough. If, in fact, the state of Maine is already at 30.6%. And then I'd like to also just talk a little bit about, the clean water, Scarborough Marsh. And I will say that, there are many areas in Scarborough that are not on sewer right now. And they go right to the water. And I think that's an area that the town needs to focus on. The Scarborough Sanitary District needs to extend the line, down some of these little streets. And there are some very large businesses that abut the marsh that, they're on septic. So the home values, I think that's great if you live next door to the Rachel Carson, or if you live next door to conserved land. But if you don't live right next door to, or within walking distance of conserved land, I'm not sure that your land value, your own home value is increasing, because of that. But, that's not the real issue. The real issue here for many of us is how this funding model works. And I just don't think it's right that, maybe the town should decide to support other causes. And, we could have a council corner some night where we talk about what are the favorite causes of all Scarborough residents. Because if you're gonna tax us so the town can make these donations, maybe, there are other worthy causes.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Sue.
Sue said a bunch of stuff. I just want to address two quick things, if
Sure.
that's all right. I
Absolutely.
do, Sue sent us a very lengthy email, which I want to acknowledge, regarding the 30 by 30 goal for Maine and the fact that, Maine is already there. I have a very different perspective where we're in a very developed area where, and Sue saying we're not there, where we're even more under pressure to try to conserve land because of the rapid growth, where is that even attainable? I'm not sure if it's even attainable, but I think we're trying to highlight the fact that we're growing so rapidly, and this is a national goal. This is a state goal. This is something that we should be focusing on as residents. And so with the 30 by 30 goal, I think it is important, I think it's important in the developed areas even more to try to limit growth and conserve more at that. And then in regards to the relationship with Scarborough Land Trust, I've been a town councilor for not even 2 years yet. So I will say I kind of rolled in with like this love for conservation and was like, wow, there's a lot of work behind it. It became abundantly clear to me immediately upon coming into here that it costs a lot of money and it costs a lot of work, and it's not easy to do this. And we would never be able to do this but for the Scarborough Land Trust. So without them, I can't even imagine what Scarborough would look like today. And how I look at it as, back in 2000, we identified this as a priority for residents, and we found a mechanism that people continue to support. And you're right, Sue. We don't have this, Sue Hamill, sorry, Sue. We don't have the same level of support, but we do have support. And I think that's where we really want to focus on educating people about why we have this partnership. We have given the Scarborough Land Trust more land because we cannot maintain it. The only other option is to raise your real estate taxes and create a whole nother department to maintain these conserved lands. And so in my mind, not knowing that much about finance, this was the best financial decision to support this goal that came out in 2000, where people wanted to buy land, they wanted to conserve, we wanted to get matching funds. And this model allows us to do it at such a rate with an organization that is so professional and good at what they do, that we've expanded and we've been able to get matching funds. And I think it's because of their hard work, we're now kind of looking at bigger issues, and we are a leader in it. And I think it's good.
The person.
This is Dawn. My question for tonight was, I thought tonight's meeting was about the land bond. I didn't know it was about the
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, because I know a lot of times they get conflated between the two. And again, the bond is actually not just specific for conservation, it's for historic preservation. It gives the town the ability to buy land for recreation and fields. There are other components in there, so the 6 million really does do that. And again, while I think the land trust to date has probably been the organization that's taken the most advantage of what we have, I heard one resident who's in the room today say he's got a few acres that he'd be willing to potentially sell to the town in the future. And so again, it does open up the door for other solutions beyond just partnering with the land trust. And again, we have a very robust process with our Parks and Conservation Land Board, so that if anybody is considering selling land, they can always approach that particular board and get evaluated. And hopefully, if it's something that that board feels like is worthy of council consideration to use land bond funds, then as Councilor Scyther said, it comes to us, it goes through a multiple step process that's vetted with public hearings. I can appreciate the perspective that, you know, why wouldn't something that comes to us go forward? And I think it's partially because we have such a good vetting process. And again, I would like to see more organizations take advantage of this land bond when it comes forward, so that we really can, you know, take advantage of it. But I don't see this as a land trust conversation. I think the land trust is a great partner. And has taken, yeah.
I thought it was on the agenda, if you're gonna have a land trust conversation, we're more than happy to talk about, you know, the dollars that was brought to town. See about the project.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, first I want to say, I am the executive director of the Scarborough Land Trust. That is my job. I am a resident of Scarborough, have been for almost 4 years now. And I've also worked for nonprofits for my entire professional career. I have worked in a field in conservation that I love and feel passionately about, at often the expense of working many hours and for less pay that I could have had in other fields, because it is so important. It really is about our future. This is about our future for everyone. I know not everyone agrees with that, but it is for everyone. And, you know, this is an opportunity to set that course for the town. The town has discussed this and decided on the 30-30 goal. We are trying to help. That is our only mission here. There's no secret agenda. Our mission is to help the residents of Scarborough in their quality of life and for the future of this community, period. We try to leverage every single dollar. We do a great job. I have a fantastic staff that works very hard to do that at the expense of not the town. Now, Mr. Hall maybe wants to create a department and add an attorney and add staff and add administrative support and stewardship support. My guess is probably not. But that's what we do in partnership with the town. There are many examples of nonprofits partnering with government entities. It happens all the time. And that's exactly what this is, a partnership to benefit the residents of Scarborough. You know, there's been a lot of loose facts circulating tonight. There are about 80 land trusts in Maine, many different sizes in many different communities. I can guarantee that in their model is to use government funding for acquisition. It is too expensive for land trusts to raise all that money privately. And that is just the reality of real estate. You know, we are a leader. Scarborough is a leader, and I'm proud to say that we're a leader in conservation. But we are not this blip out in the middle of nowhere. South Portland, for example, bonded $4.5 million in 2021 for conservation. Wyndham bonded $1.8 million in 2021 for conservation. Brunswick appropriated $4 million in 2021 for conservation. I have a whole sheet of matching town funds to LMF grants. I won't read them all for you tonight, but I'm happy to provide them. You know, there are towns throughout Maine that support conservation in various ways. It's not all bonding. It's not, some of it's direct appropriation, some of it's fees. You know, towns get creative. Bonding has worked for us. The bond is a town mechanism. It belongs to the town. The town has used the land bond on several projects. Maine Farmland Trust has used the land bond on several projects. Now, we happen to be based here and have a great relationship with the town and do that work that takes some of the burden off of the town to do. We have a very strong agreement that is put in place on every property that land bond money is used that gives town the enforcement forever in perpetuity to enforce those restrictions, no matter who owns it. The town has that enforcement capability forever. So, you know, those are just some of the points I wanted to make. I'm happy to address other comments as they come up. But I agree, this is not a land trust discussion. This is about the land bond and the future of Scarborough.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stanis. Couple of things. The first thing, what Mr. Mackey just said about those restrictions is true to the extent that it's not subject to eminent domain, which is something that I'm passionate about the past few months. But any land that is conserved is at the whim of a politician to potentially decide that a new infrastructure project might go through there, and then it's not actually conserved, unless it's at the federal government at the national park level, and then a state can't actually take it. But I think conservation is incredibly important. I really appreciated this gentleman's words about how important it is, especially to those of us that are younger and are looking for a really bright future ahead here in Scarborough. I think especially putting it to voters is so important, and that's what I really appreciate about the fact that the town council isn't just considering that this be done just as a council vote, that it's going to the voters. I put my hand down at 3 million because I feel like it might, in keeping with that, it might be even more important that this be a continuing conversation instead of 6 million for the next. Don't know if we're expecting that to be 10 years or however many, that it might be nice to do 3 million here, 3 million there more frequently, and also the fact that it's more likely to pass. But I also think that Sue, for example, has made some really good points. One being that private investment, private donations, and private partnership could potentially be decreased if we have too great a public commitment. In that, I guess I'm kind of an example. Like John might have been referring to me earlier. I said I want to donate these 8 acres to the town or land trust, not have any, not it be purchased from me or have any financial costs to the town. But there could be landowners or investors, I guess, that might, or private donations that might be less likely to put forward funds to this cause if we have such a large land bond. And I think that's somewhat been addressed. And I think Andrew has, Mr. Mackey has talked about that the land trust does look to do like matching funds where you can use some land bond money here if we get this private investment coming through as well. But the other reason why it seems it's so hypocritical that the town right now wants to invest all this money into land conservation, and then another part of our town we want to pave over with the Gorham Connector Turnpike proposal. And what that turnpike would do is cause far, far more land to be developed in our surrounding communities than any possible land we could purchase with that $6 million. Here's a really interesting statistic. In 1950, Portland's population was 77,634. In 2022, Portland's population was 68,424. That's over 10% decrease in population over those years. In 1950, Scarborough's population was 4,600. In 2020, Scarborough's population was 22,135. That's because of sprawl. That's because we're building our infrastructure to encourage sprawl, to encourage people to live further out and commute from houses in suburbia and in the countryside into nodes of employment instead of incentivizing people to live where they work. And all this turnpike does is push that possible commuting time further out into the countryside so that you have increasing sprawl in the towns like Standish, Buxton, Leamington, and increasing land eaten up by that development that should be conserved just as much as any land that we might be wanting to conserve with a $6 million. So that's really important to consider. And Portland has said that they've just revamped their whole land use code and their development codes to prioritize new construction in Portland. And one of those ways is to transform the Franklin Arterial back into the neighborhood that it was before urban blight and eminent domain took that neighborhood and turned it into Maine's next poster board infrastructure project. And we lost so much dense development in Portland for sprawl in the rest of our southern Maine community. And they want to reverse that, but they said that they cannot reverse that. They cannot turn that back into hundreds of new housing units if this Gorham Connector gets built, because it would put that additional traffic onto 295 and put that additional traffic coming from all the new development in the surrounding communities back into Portland. Franklin Arterial would not be able to be turned back into a normal road. So I'll wrap that up. I went on way longer about.
No worries,
Gorham
we're
Connector,
informal. I don't have a timer going on anybody else. I think it's
I just
important.
also want to say this Council Corner, thank you so much, everyone. I think this is an amazing example of how our town can do so well with direct democracy, and to the councilors that are here and spending your time to listen to us and to everyone who's come. It's really amazing and a good thing for all of us.
Thank you. Allison?
Hi, Allison Bristol. Couple of things. First, I didn't really prepare as much as I normally do if I come to a council meeting or something. I just happened to be in the neighborhood, so I said,
Well, shame on you, Allison. I'm.
well, another couple of opportunities.
You go for it.
So, first, I want to say I agree with what's been said, that I don't think there's anybody here in the room that doesn't appreciate the beauty of Scarborough and the importance of conserving it. I think it's about how we're doing it and the timing of how we're doing it. I also didn't mean to imply by my comment about the first council corner that you guys don't work really hard, and work is very appreciated. Now, having said that, where I'm coming from, and I also want to thank the woman for making the clarification about the meeting being about the land bond versus being about the land trust. So where I'm coming from is sort of to support what Richard was saying about timing, where there's so much else going on. I think the school is the top priority. I think I've paid attention to the community center, conversation, very concerned about that. And we're talking about, take it to the voters. There are times where I wish the council would recognize something that perhaps isn't, a good thing, even though it's being recommended, because an $84 million community center, I don't want to say it's irresponsible, but I think it's a lot to put out there to the voters. And so in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this is top tier. It's also interesting from what I have seen is, incrementally what the town has bonded for, I'm going to say the land trust, but apparently not, because we could also use the money for parks and
Correct.
recreation.
Yep.
Which actually, I don't want to say it's a concern. I'd like to know more about that, because is this a backdoor way to get money that's not in the capital budget for things like a baseball field or not AstroTurf, that's a bad example. But I walked into the meeting thinking it was about the land trust, so I would like to understand more about what this $6 million could be used for. So the perspective I'm coming is as a fundraiser. So I spent my career, I've raised over $100 million, so I have a little bit of experience, in this realm. I disagree that this is a matching gift. I think it's more like seed money. I would like, and just using the land trust as an example, and I also want to say, I love all the natural land and beauty in Scarborough. The first time I took a canoe tour on the marsh in July, full moon. It was fabulous. The Audubon tour guide was jazzed to see the first great horned owl she's ever seen in 32 years of doing it. So it's a beautiful thing. But just, from the financial perspective, I would like to see the land trust raising money, and then, or you could certainly raise private funds. There's no reason why the town has to, provide seed money for the land trust to go out and raise money, although I do appreciate the expense involved in raising money in terms of personnel and, that kind of thing. Maybe with government grants, I'm not as familiar with that, but I have read, like, on the state ballot, there's a ballot question on the main ballot for 2024 about funding a bond for historical buildings, and that 25% of it would be matched locally. So I would rather see that approach, but I would first like to see, in the case of the land trust, what the land trust is doing to raise money, and then perhaps Scarborough support that initiative versus just saying you've got carte blanche with this amount of money and go forth and see what you can do with it.
Great. Thank you, Allison. So, largely this conversation is driven and facilitated by counselors. We do have staff here, and I don't have the language that was prepared, Tom, for the uses specifically. But that was a deliberate decision, a decision point that we needed to make in terms of what the language is going to look like for the potential referendum. And so right clearly on the ballot with the referendum language will include the uses that are allowed, which I think is important for residents to know and to understand and to have that information in the booth if you don't have it ahead of time, like people who are willing to come and engage. So I did want to make that point, and if you want, Tom can read off the eligible uses, or we can pivot the conversation. Allison, can you take the mic? Thank you.
When we did the Second Amendment on the CEA document, that, for $70 million, you know, to shelter another
you so much.
$70 million with the state. Tom's looking puzzled. Well, this, yeah, so, well, the Second Amendment on I don't know if it's TIF district, maybe CEA is the wrong thing, on the downtown omnibus, yada, 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 forgive me, that, we were sheltering $70 million, and there is a, document that's an attachment to that that shows how that money would be spent, but there's also dollar increments on it. So it's not just saying, well, it could be a ballpark, it could be this, it could be a that. It was amounts of money designated for the different expenditures. So
Yeah,
I think that would be interesting to know as well.
Yeah, what you're referring to is really a function of state law, that we need the Department of Economic and Community Development in that context limits us, and state law limits us as to what we can use TIF funds for. So we are quite specific in terms of categories and approximate amounts. We're not necessarily held to those amounts, but we do include those as part of the application and state approval. The land bond language I just handed to Councilor Seither. I can't speak to the origin. The first land bond was before my time, but I believe the allowed purposes have been consistent in all 4 requests that have gone to the voters. And there's 7 different categories. I believe they are intentionally intend to provide some level of flexibility. And I can speak to how we've used that flexibility in terms of whether it's land conservation or other uses. But if you wish, we can read them off.
Is it these ones right here?
Yeah.
It is,
Using-
yep. Nice work, John. So this language is
Using board
actually
docs.
printed on the ballot. The format here is a little hard to follow, but they're actually bulletized on the ballot, so it's, I think, a lot easier to follow for you. There you go.
There it is. Do you want to read them, John?
Yeah. So it's for the following purposes: to provide or maintain public access and to allow passive or active recreation, and to conserve water quality, natural resources, or other natural areas, and to provide easements for walking or biking trails, and to preserve significant historic sites, and to preserve sites which can be considered part of the character to the community, and to add to existing conservation and public areas. The one thing on here, the bullet around to provide easement for walking or biking trails, just for the public's awareness, and I'm sure this will come out more. We are doing a townwide transportation study, and one of those things is looking at how do we, enable more biking across the community. That's going to be a key tenet of the transportation study. So again, I know that's coming, and I know there will be like a desire to see how we can actually do that. And I guess I didn't connect the dots that this bond money could actually help the town do any sort of acquisition that may be needed to help with that particular initiative that I know is very important to a lot of people, especially those on the transportation committee.
Yeah, I would say of the $7.5 million that's been approved by the voters over 4 different occasions, the vast majority, probably $6.5 million of that has been kind of traditional land conservation. There was about $1 million for the acquisition of the Higgins Beach parking lot, came from these funds.
Well, there you have it.
Well, which perhaps you might favor. And then there've been a couple of smaller kind of historic preservation related ones. We relocated an arch from the Danish Village into the park here. We helped the Historical Society with some refurbishment of the Beechwood Schoolhouse. And there's a third use that escapes me. Oh, Alder Hall, which we're selling back for the same purchase price. So again, the vast majority has gone to conservation. That's not to say, this is the voters are providing authorization for the council through its processes to determine use of those funds, so long as they fit into one or more of these categories.
And just looking at this, if I can just, respond to this. So, I mean, historic sites, I'm assuming would not be land trust, right? Does that fall under that would fall under a different category or
Correct.
different than land trust. So I guess the question is what would, and then the other, preserved sites which can be considered part of character of the community is a little dicey because I think that that can be subjective. And then to add to existing conservation in public areas, that to me, I mean, what pops off the top of my head is, could a public area be the Downs Town Center? Because that's a public area, that's the big public area in the Downs. So, you know, if that were something that were brought to the table, that would be of concern because it's, you know, that's not the same as, you know, Pleasant Hill
Yeah.
Preserve.
I think Councilor Anderson spoke to it. I mean, each and every time the council chooses to use this, there is a public process. There's a first reading, a public hearing, and a second reading. I would fully expect the public to have comments if the council chooses to get fast and loose with definitions and use of these funds. I personally have the utmost faith in that public process to keep, that's important checks and balances that I think are part of the process intentionally.
Oh,
Correct.
can we have the mic? Can you use the microphone? Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There are town committees made up of volunteers, staff from the town and town council that review this before it ever gets to the town council.
Mhm.
And there are checklists and things that they grade anybody. You could come to this Parks and Conservation and said, I think this land is something we ought to consider. They go through a whole process of grading that land. What value does it bring? What is important about it? Is, you know, so it goes through a whole process, and if it passes that process, then it is made a recommendation to town council, but it goes through multiple meetings and reviews before it ever gets to the town council. And anybody can bring land to the, Parks and Conservation.
Mhm.
To ask for them. So it's not just the land trust, it's available for other entities like the Historical Society. I mean, there are other groups that have brought things forward.
Well,
that's why I'm glad we clarified that the meetings about
I do want to circle back to a point that Andrew made, just to underscore it. Though the Land Trust is a tremendous partner, their sole mission is to identify properties, many of which incidentally take a decade to negotiate. These things don't happen overnight, frankly. So they are quite prolific in bringing forward opportunities to be vetted through our process. There are two occasions I could think of, and there may be a third, where we've partnered with the Maine Farmland Trust. And in that instance, we essentially, using these funds, have purchased the development rights on farms. The two that come to mind are the Frith Farm on Ash Swamp Road and Comstock off Barrier Road. And in those instances, we get the value of open space being available. It can be farmed, so it's an agricultural easement rather than a conservation easement. So there are other partners that bring projects to us, and there's many ways that we can use these funds to benefit the community in one sense or another.
So as we come up on 8 o'clock, I think there are two residents toward the back who've not spoken, and Marvin has the microphone. So I'm going to kind of let that back quadrant make their remarks, and then we'll turn it back over to the council and kind of wrap things up here for this evening. So go ahead, Marvin. Thank you.
I have a question. What you said, just for clarification, and this is very helpful. A lot of information going around. When you said the vast majority of the 7 million, correct me, has gone to traditional land conservation. Are we talking about liaising with the land trust for those, generally speaking?
In most instances, but I just referenced two other ones where they were not the one that brought the project, nor are the partner in the project.
Okay, and I wanted to make a comment. make a suggestion very quickly. Uh, The comment is about the conversation steering toward the land trust. And I do want to reflect that there was from the councilors, when Allison asked the original question, please tee this up, I think it was Allison. There was conversation about the leveraging of this money. There was conversation about the data. Well, actually, I'd be interested in the data, but the conversation was about the amount of money that's been brought in by town action. And then the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 ratio. So one of those thirds, of course, is represented here at least by the land trust. So I think conversation got off on that direction from leadership at the dais would be my 2 cents. And my final suggestion is there any way for government, you guys, to incentivize private donation to an entity which I support, the land trust? I know the federal government incentivizes it by giving you a tax break. In my opinion, that's the more appropriate approach that government may take. How can you encourage us to give more money to the land trust to do all these great things, not take our money through taxation? That doesn't feel right to me, as I've already said. I'll stop there.
Hi, Caitlin Berry. So I just wanted to bring up a couple things. I'll try not to get emotional here because it's also something I'm very passionate about, and it's hard for me to always articulate it clearly. But you know, a couple things have been brought up today about private donations and funding the land trust of private donations. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Scarborough Land Trust is funded for a lot through private donations, right? And that's something that is really important. It's great. I think we're lucky the amount of private donations that they do get and how instrumental they've been in conserving land they already have. I wish that I had $1 million to give. I wish I had land to give. I don't. So for me, an avenue of which I have a say in this is something like a land fund. So I echo your sentiment as well. I moved to Scarborough because it's beautiful, has beautiful resources. And I think that as I see rapid development happening, that's down. And I mean, I've talked to 50 people in the past week who are concerned how rapidly this is developing and the importance of conserving the land. And it's not much. You can look at the maps and there's only so much. I'm actually concerned that by 2030, what land is there going to be left to conserve? So I think it's an extremely important issue. And I think when you look at what developers are paying for some of these parcels of land, they have massively deep pockets. And so something like $6 million to assist in any way we can is something I'm completely willing to support as a taxpayer. And I understand the concern. I live in a modest house. I don't have a huge salary to give towards these things. But I think that it's important, and I think it's bigger than ourselves sometimes. It's the future. It's also, I'm very concerned about habitat loss. I mean, I see some of these places. There's a parcel right next to my home that could be developed. And I walk there all the time, and I see deer going through there. I see turkeys. I see like all these turtles, and it upsets me because I think it's important. I think we have a greater responsibility to care for, other living things as well in our community. And it's really important. And this is just one way that I see that we can support that. And I also think it's important to remember that as we're all here tonight providing our opinions, there's a lot more people in this town than I wish I saw more people here, but there's a lot more people in the town, and we should ultimately have the ability to choose this. So definitely also supporting that it's just getting it on the ballot. I think it's important. And John, you mentioned that so people have the say. You can choose to not vote for it. Some people, this room won't. But I think it's important that people are made aware and have that choice.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to council comments for closing remarks. Sue, I see you. It's 8 o'clock. I'm trying to be respectful to staff and to my fellow counselors' time and to everybody else's time. Council comments to close us out, and then I have one thing I can say.
No, I'm available to talk to anyone. I think people know that I'm an advocate for this. I know we've heard tonight that maybe this is a bad timing. We have a lot of other priorities, but I think as we just heard other comments, the land is going fast and the time is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime anybody goes to the polls, it's a value-based decision. There's no right or wrong decision for anybody to make on this. It's really up to you on what's important to you. And, I think, hopefully, I think it was good feedback about how do we talk about this? Because I think we need to be careful not to steer this too much to the land bond, especially when we think about all of the qualified uses that this could mean, even though conservation is super important for the town. So I think that's just good advice that we need to be thinking about as we inform and educate the public more on what the land bond is. And again, I hear a lot too, and I think it's just it's a different perspective where I feel like there are some perspectives that feel like it's not the role of government to be involved in this. And some people I've heard tonight say they want the government involved in this. And again, I think the best we can do is ask, what role do you want your government to play in terms of conservation? This is one thing we can do. Do you want it or not? And that's up to the community to decide.
I always come into these conversations hoping the room is going to be filled. Thank you so much for being here. I come into these conversations with a tremendous amount of respect for the residents who are willing to come and engage, and gratitude. So thank you all for being here. As was mentioned briefly a couple of different times in passing, the town is working on an open space plan. And they are in the process of having some of their public meetings and initial presentations. And so I have postcards to promote their upcoming meetings, and then on the back to learn more about the open space plan and what work is being done in that regard. And so I will put those up back. If you can sign in, now it's sign out on the sheet, that's always appreciated. We also have exit slips up back for anyone who's interested in filling out the exit slip to give us a little bit of feedback about how you felt about tonight's forum. And that will, further inform our decision-making to plan future forums. So thank you, everybody, so much for being here. And it's a 5x7 notebook with my kids' pictures on it. I don't think anybody else